Hello there, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. Today, I have two guests. And no, this is not a composer duo. Instead, it is composer Suvi-Eeva Äikäs and director Ben Steiner. And the two of them recently worked on Ben's film Matriarch, which obviously Ben directed and for which Suvi provided the music. So this will be the first time that I'll have a director on the show talking about their work as a director. If you remember, Mark Jankin appeared around this time last year to talk about his film Ennismane, but he was also the composer for that film, the composer for his prior film Bait as well. So that's what he and I talked about. So it's a very cool dynamic here, hearing about the music both from the composer's perspective and from the director's perspective. Something I've been trying to do for a little while, and I'm glad I finally have. Suvi's score is pretty cool. It's fairly short on the release, I believe, if I remember right. Very vocal based. You have these three intertwining voices. Really atmospheric, eerie, haunting, very cool stuff. Now you can find out more about Ben and Suvi on their social media. Do the same for me. If you're enjoying the show, let me know. Leave a review, leave a rating, shoot me a message. Always love hearing from folks. If not, I won't hold it against you. And this is one of the last episodes of this season. It's always sad when this happens, but let's not get too despondent. Instead, let's sit back and listen. Ben, Suvi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, really well, thanks. Yeah,
pretty
pretty
good.
good.
For having us.
Yeah, of course. And it's for me a little more of an unusual setup where we're talking about the film Matriarch primarily. Suvi, you composed the score for it, and Ben, you wrote and directed it. Like I told you before, I've wanted to get a director on, so we've got that covered, and I'm kind of interested in the additional perspective or view that you'll hopefully bring to talking about the score. I'll tee it off for you, Ben, actually, because you not only directed the film, but you wrote it as well. During that process, do you ever have music in mind or a particular style or idea of how you want that to be?
Not specifically, but I think I'd always kind of had in mind something like the kind of thing that Suvi does and kind of ended up doing for Matriarch, something that's more kind of ambient and kind of atmospheric, less about kind of cues and kind of underlining moments in a really kind of emphatic way. And in my sort of previous work, that's the kind of scores that I've kind of gone for. Yeah, that more kind of ambient, atmospheric approach. So I think I kind of imagined that I would be looking for something similar, but I didn't have any kind of real like specific ideas about like instrumentation or kind of anything like that. But I mean that kind of stuff did kind of develop quite quickly. A lot of the work that Suvi did came out of like the themes of the film that were kind of quite readily apparent, and we kind of started talking about kind of quite quickly when we did start working together.
Yeah, so how did you first get connected, and then if you two could expand on those initial conversations?
We were just trying to remember back when the first time we met, and we were just talking about, you mentioned the sort of maiden mother crone idea, which was really inspiring, which is kind of goes throughout the whole score as an ideology behind it all. So I mean that was
so I mean I think if we just take a step back, so like the way that we know each other through Ben Salisbury and Geoff Barrow, the composers who work on like Alex Garland's stuff. I mean, they work on a lot of projects, obviously, but Alex Garland and kind of Ben Wheatley. So Suvi has worked a lot with them, and then so in the kind of the very early days, I was just kind of talking about it with Ben Salisbury, but in a kind of like a social way, and then he suggested Suvi, and then I went to listen to the work that Suvi had done on Devs, the Alex Garland TV show, and there were a couple of tracks on that soundtrack of Suvi's that were immediately like, and actually it's funny, back to your first question, when I heard them, they were like, oh yeah, I want a bit of that. It was so like Suvi's vocals were like very prominent, which obviously with the themes within Matriarch having a kind of a female vocal really, kind of made sense, and that sense of it being more kind of ambient and atmospheric.
So then, Suvi, I'm assuming then that when the two of you started talking, or when Ben got in touch, your work on devs and that sort of style, was that like the initial starting point?
So yeah, just sort of thinking in terms of minimal, sort of experimental vocal things and using experimental techniques, and yeah, I think that was the starting point.
So then with the starting point of something that you've already created, how are you jumping off of that, creating something that's going to be similar enough but also new, like not just doing the same thing over again?
I mean, it was sort of easy because you explained who Laura is. You already had, like, she was a really complex established character, and all you had to do really is explain who Laura is and what she's going through, and I already had ideas in my head. I always kind of hear it first in my head, and then I'm like try and somehow put it on there through the mic, and if there is a really good character, it's quite easy. The music kind of almost makes itself.
And so with it then, like, being, because the score, when it's used, it's not, I'd say in the film, it's not a particularly heavy-handed score. I don't know the number of minutes, but like the soundtrack release is 24 minutes, and it's not like heavily scored in the film. So it does seem quite often when it comes up, it's coming up almost like through the perspective of that lead character. And you said that kind of jumped out at you initially. Was that sort of an idea or an approach that you two were on the same page on?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think I knew from kind of early on, again, that I didn't want, like wall-to-wall score. I didn't want it, the kind of it to be sort of slathered over everything, so that when it is used, it's all the more powerful. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say if I, actually verbalized I only want like 24 minutes of score across, an hour and 25. But yeah, I think just both of our kind of less is more kind of instincts just kind of naturally led us to, to that place.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's, for me as well, really important. There's always time for the film to breathe. I feel like a lot of times films these days, the pace is just crazy. Just like holding to the seat of your pants, or what was the sentence? Yeah. So I really liked it in this one, where there's just, the story and the actors acting, everything's so strong. You don't need to have that kind of pace or like put music everywhere. It's strong enough on its own, and then the music kind of supports those important moments.
Why do you think that so many films or scores now don't do that? For instance, I watched, I think it's a 1963 film, Three Outlaw Samurai, last night, before I watched Matriarch. For whatever reason, I made that my double feature. But, it's an old Japanese samurai film, and there's probably 12 minutes of score in it. And so it's really interesting hearing, like, how much more, I think, normalized that was, however many decades ago. Do you have any idea why that sort of thing has changed?
You could look at it from so many different perspectives. Quite often, I just wonder if it's like people actually do, you would say, is it the attention span of people, or some sort of algorithm that dictates it? Can be both of those things, but there is space to not do that with everything.
Yeah. Because music can often be used as a shortcut, rather than kind of sort of working, I don't know, like with what you're seeing. It's almost like instead of, to a degree, I wonder. So, I mean, maybe it's just a kind of a way of, making it as easy as possible, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but, making it very easy for the audience to understand, like, what they are supposed, in inverted commas, to be feeling, in a scene. I mean, I don't know. I think, as Suvi says, I think there's lots of ways you could come at that question, because maybe some of it is with like double screening, that it's like if you're like looking at your phone, you know what I mean. But you can kind of still somehow stay with the kind of the essence of the story, or maintain some connection with it if you're only kind of looking at it with half an eye. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Ben, the idea of double screening, like I know it's something that people do, but God, is like a viewer, just that concept. Drives me, makes me sick. It's horrible.
It's so weird.
And with a film like this, where it is slower paced, Suvi, like you're saying, there's an intentionality of letting it breathe, that I just feel like if you're not an engaged viewer the impact of everything just disappears.
I mean, yeah, like I said, it is strong enough on its own like that. And it's like that film Iceman. Have you seen it? Where it's about this Neolithic, prehistoric, like a survival story, and there's no dialogue really, and there's no music. Maybe in credits a little bit of music, but like the story makes sense, and you don't need neither of them. And it's like the strongest film, one of the strongest films I've seen.
Well, then, like, from that perspective, because I think we often view music, film music, as like a necessity that it has to be there, and I think a lot of people do think that there's like a necessity of it, building events, building character, things like that. But obviously, like, here you're saying, which I agree with, that sometimes you just don't need to use it. So, from that perspective, I mean, what are you thinking of the purpose of music in film?
Wow.
Purpose of music in film.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I'm the heavy questions.
I mean, it does depend on the film and the story a lot. Obviously, like films that benefit of music and, you know, I don't know, Star Wars and themes. And I'm not saying themes aren't important. I need to make that clear. Like themes and motifs and things that develop throughout the film, but isn't like everywhere. Those are important. So it can really help give the film its own, what's the word? Its own
kind of world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or its own identity, basically.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge question, because it can be to provoke emotion, to kind of create the mood. I mean, obviously, if you have like on a really basic level, like sad music, like action music, you know what I mean, spooky music. I don't know. Sometimes I've heard by possibly like very like austere sort of German directors talking about music as sort of like a form of like audience manipulation, as if that's a bad thing. But then it's like, well, what isn't any kind of storytelling or even any kind of communication is manipulation of a kind.
Yeah, I've always found that an interesting like critique or comment on film music, because every other element of the film is there. You assume is that there's a purpose or an intention behind it. Lighting, the acting, the script is all meant to generate something. So I don't know why film music gets singled out.
Well, I don't know, but then on the other hand, just thinking about it now, maybe it's like, I'm not necessarily making this argument, but maybe you could argue that the emotion that music provokes isn't earned in the same way that maybe, you know, kind of something that's kind of provoked by the writing or the acting or whatever other element of the film. Because, you know, you can literally you can play a sad chord and immediately start to kind of create, you know, a particular feeling, or, you know, to any kind of pulse, you know, sort of just like a sense of kind of tension or movement or kind of energy. So it's kind of, I'm not in any way trying to say that the music is easy at all, because music's so powerful. I think you can kind of get somewhere very quickly with it. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like provoking a feeling.
Well, and on that, I mean, Suvi, is that something that ever comes to mind in this film or the other projects that you've worked on, of avoiding a manipulation, let's call it, that feels like unearned or too obvious?
I think there's always that where you're trying to avoid certain things that are, you know, the obvious synth pulls everywhere whenever you need tension. Something's not tense enough, but then finding other ways to do that isn't as obvious. Or you don't want to put extremely sad music on a really sad moment necessarily, because it would just cancel out in a way. So yeah, there's definitely ways where you can just do too much with the music.
Going back on a couple of threads we've talked about, when you started scoring the film, what was your intention with it, or what were you trying to
basically I guess the sort of main thing in the film, which is about the, obviously I can spoil because it's been for a while, haven't it?
Yeah.
So the idea that these three characters are connected, and so like you spoke about the maiden, mother, crone, and so I ended up having like three voices pretty much throughout, just having that ideology going throughout the whole score.
I mean, like Laura is like the main character is very kind of lost, and she's kind of like sort of disconnected. I mean, a fundamental thing in the story is how she's kind of disconnected from her true mother, which is, I was going to say, the titular Worm Eater. The film originally was called Worm Eater, and then the later on changed to Matriarch, but like, you know, the goddess. And so Laura is this kind of, you know, sort of lost, like disconnected kind of person. So I think something that we talked about, and where the kind of one of the ways that the sort of voice motif is used in as it's a kind of a call. It sounds like a sort of. I mean, it is literally like like whale song or kind of any other mother kind of calling to its child, kind of across a wilderness. And so these quite kind of yearning, sort of isolated voices became quite early on a sort of a motif.
Yeah, I completely forgot we had these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it was like nearly 2 years ago. So yeah, it was it was a while.
But that was definitely one thing, like the calling idea of calling and like how to do that without words. Yeah, basically. Yeah. And it ended up being this kind of weird how like the vocals for Laura kind of all ended up going through like recording it through piano strings, because I was making vocals and then I realized the piano was resonating with me, and then recording it through that kind of gave it this really harsh sort of metallic and cold quality. And then it sort of made me also sing almost like a whale calling type of thing. Yeah. So it was all it definitely started from that calling thing.
And how did that idea come up, both on the motif and then you recording the vocals?
I mean, so I can't answer the part about the recording of it, but I think the motif, because we were talking about this just before we came on, and we couldn't remember whether the idea of having these kind of three voices, and I think as Suvi was saying, it was actually only sort of some way into the project that I realised that the three kind of female characters represent the classic archetypal mother, maiden, crone triumvirate. So we can't remember whether this idea of having three voices came from listening to Suvi's work on Devs and hearing Suvi's voice, and then it's sort of coming that way around, or whether it was sort of the other way around, and that we started talking about.
Do you remember showing me this, like, because you were like driving around Shepton Mallet where you were filming? Yeah. You showed me video of these trees.
Yes, I remember.
You said you were listening to the queue driving to Village.
Oh right, yeah.
I did like an early demo or something. So you drove around, and then you kind of thought of maybe it was sort of like a
weird kind of synchronicity. Yeah, I mean, so what Suvi's talking about there is that there is just a shot in the film, but just like this came across even these three trees just kind of in the middle of nowhere, kind of this really kind of flat landscape out in the Somerset levels, and just these three really odd looking trees that kind of look like sort of screaming heads. They kind of have these real like bursts of kind of branches, these three of them together, which kind of immediately made me think of this mother, maiden, crone triumvirate that had been kind of going around in my head. So that's a really, really sort of unclear to the point of being incomprehensible non-answer. But it's just hard because it was like 18 months ago or something. But it's hard just to pick up the kind of the beginning of the thread of kind of how these sort of different different things feed into each other. But I can say that this idea going with Suvi's vocals and having these three voices came up pretty early.
Yeah, I think it was about, like, I would make a demos and you'd have them with you when you're filming, and then you'd have ideas, and it was kind of like going back and forth a bit. Yeah. And in terms of recording, it would have just been me with pedals, and I was recording in a room that had a piano. And I mean, we did talk about the piano as well, incorporating that in the score. Yeah. So I guess I was experimenting with trying to incorporate the piano as well as vocals. But then while I was doing the vocals, I would hear the piano sort of resonating. And then I realized, like, if I record it through the piano strings, they kind of reverberate with it. So it gives it this weird quality, like a long, cold reverb tail that I could then put all Laura's vocals through. And it would have this lonely, cold quality to it.
Yeah, it's just maybe to say for anyone who might be listening who hasn't seen the film, the piano is a kind of a sort of a symbol of like the toxic relationship between the main character and her kind of long estranged mother, which the main character kind of takes a weird kind of revenge on as a penultimate scene in the movie. But hence
favorite scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Suvi, I hope you treated your piano.
Yeah, no one peed on that piano. Yeah, it was safe.
I mean, that it might change the sound.
No, I was thinking about it, but no, I wasn't. But yeah.
And you just mentioned a minute ago as well, sending demos to Ben, him listening to them, playing them, and then having conversations afterwards. Can you expand a little bit on that process?
I think it was Laura's vocals was that piano thing, and keeping it minimal, and whenever there's like a connection happening, you'd hear those vocals, those pianos, string vocals. And then for Worm Eater, I think we were just talking about the scenes and what was going to happen, which is like being devoured by worms, which is a goddess, and the goddess of rot and rebirth. And I was just sort of thinking from there, how can I expand these vocals into something that encompasses a whole cycle of life and death? And so it ended up using like just heavily processing it with pedals and stuff like that, and multiplying the vocals and making it into these big swoops. And I was really like inspired by what Ben described. Obviously I didn't have the VFX for quite a while, but I could just imagine, like, I think you said to me something like, just imagine this like, you know, massive swoop of worms.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's start from there. Did you remember?
Yeah, I mean, my main memory is of there not being like a huge amount of back and forth, and I don't mean not a lot of like collaboration or communication, but I mean like just mean not having that many notes, because just everything that was coming through was really good. We did seem to be like on the same kind of wavelength, like immediately. Really, there were no big like sort of changes of course or like big moments of, you know, where I had to kind of go, yeah, no, I totally didn't mean that. You know, that never happened. Yeah. So.
Oh no, as in like, yeah, I would play something. And
yeah.
Be like, yes, this is good.
Think,
more of this.
Yeah. So I would, you know, be kind of, you know, hearing things, you know, constantly as Suvi was kind of, you know, developing them. It was mainly me just going like, yeah, this is great, more of that. Yeah, brilliant. Can't wait to hear it. And, you know, I mean, I was occasionally more helpful than that, but in general, it was, it was like not a lot of steer, like I said.
Now, obviously, we talked about like there being a reason that Ben sought you out, but even still, like the first time you sent him a demo or some examples of what you were putting together, was there a paranoia or a worry that his response was going to be like, this is not even close?
I mean, there's always that, isn't there? When you start a new collaboration and you're kind of like being vulnerable and coming up with here's the idea, and you know. But I mean, with film, it's always kind of different because you are working towards the same thing and you talk more about the film itself. So even if the feedback would have been, oh, this is not right, it's not the end of the world, it's more like, well, we'll try again. But because we both think we were saying vocals, so yeah. But I mean, I wasn't, in all honesty, I didn't really think about it. I just did it and sent it off, really.
We talked about it. We talked a lot at the very beginning about these kind of ideas and themes and the kind of palette, to use the kind of the wrong metaphor. So I think kind of once we'd sort of established that, she was never going to go wrong because she was never going to kind of stray outside of that. When I say stray outside of it, I don't mean it was like really rigid sort of, you know, it's only going to be this and whatever. But I just mean because we'd kind of spoken about it so in depth before Suvi really kind of got into it. That really helped, and that's why there wasn't a huge amount of back and forth.
I think one thing I really loved, which is like what any composer's dream is to, like, we didn't really have temp score at all, did we? Like, we didn't really have, there was none of that, oh, let's make it sound like this and then we'll be great. Yeah, it was just such a unique story. It was like sort of easy to make something, kind of not easy, but it came naturally. Right. It was all quite organic. Maybe that's why there wasn't too much sort of back and forth and all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only time when we sort of had to kind of, what did I say, Suvi had to start again on something was the scene in the church towards the end, and there's kind of music playing in the church, which is meant to be the kind of congregations they're singing. And so I wanted a kind of a pseudo hymn, or I thought I wanted a pseudo hymn. So I wrote lyrics for this, you know, kind of hymn. And then I asked Suvi to write music for those lyrics, but to basically the brief was like, don't make it too good because it has to sound like someone in the congregation has like written it on their, oh, they're all retired, so it's all days off, but you know, but someone in the congregation had written it, like a non-professional musician had kind of written this hymn. And then Suvi recorded the extras, the orgy extras, before they took all their clothes off to sing the lyrics, and Suvi recorded it, and then we kind of put it in place. You know, Suvi put it all together, and we kind of had it over the scene, and we've just kind of wasn't quite working, and so then we kind of started again. And I think, was it your idea? I think it was to try this more like a song. A song, and so it was a more like a sort of slightly cult like cultish 70s, sort of like born again Christian guitar and sort of like, is it harmonium?
Flutes and mellotron type.
Yeah, kind of like sort of like a sort of church organ kind of harmonium type thing, but then kind of with guitar, sort of acoustic guitar over it. And again, you can't really hear the lyrics because, 20 non-professionals singing all at once, that's like 20 untrained voices all over each other, so you can't really make it out, but it still works. The kind of the atmosphere that it created was just kind of much more appropriate, it being more of a kind of like new agey cult kind of a sound, rather than it being like a really kind of old style hymn.
Yeah, it did give it a different energy, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was great to record it in the same space as the actual thing was shot, so it actually sounded like it was in the space, because it was in the space.
Do you think that also, because it's in the space, sung by the extras, like, does that give it more of maybe a connection to the film and how it is eventually used?
Well, I wonder if it sort of helped the extras and actors to get into the this is why.
Yeah, maybe. Did they do it before the audio or afterwards?
Yes, we did it before.
Was it before? I mean, because maybe but maybe it did. Maybe just doing something together kind of helped them, kind of warm up a little bit. But then, having said that, they were all very keen to, like, when it was like the signal was given to like get the dress, get naked. They were just like, dressing goes off, like bang, yeah.
Just left.
So some good pre-order.
Yes. So it's so important.
Well, and so going back to the original piece that you'd written for that, Suvi, what do you do with that music once, like, you've written it and then it's not going to appear in the film? You still have it. What happens to it? Does anything happen to it?
It just stays in the hard drive in the cupboard. Like, it'll just be in the archives.
Do you ever like draw on old? Do you have like like the bottom drawer?
I
and
really
draw on like old stuff.
I rarely look back. I really should. I feel like there might be some interesting stuff there, because I pretty much just archive and leave it.
Right.
So maybe I should go and have a look what's in there. But yeah.
If everything you hear, if it's all crap and you hate it, it was Ben's fault.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll take that.
We've mentioned this. You were on the same page, I think, pretty early on about stylistically and the broader approach. But Ben, what was your first reaction to hearing?
Just incredibly positive, because I just thought, yes, she totally gets it, and I could, immediately see how it was going to fit into the movie and really elevate the film. Atmosphere, obviously, atmosphere is an important part of any film, but like, particularly always intending for it to be kind of very atmospheric. And so it was just like a huge relief, basically, to hear it and just be like, yeah, this is going to work.
The thing I think that struck me right from the get-go is you keep talking about like atmosphere, ambiance. The very beginning, I think in particular, the music is very atmospheric there, to the point where you're wondering if it's overlapping with the sound design as well. And so, Suvi, in your approach, I mean, how much were you working with the sound design and striking that balance, or on the flip side, like, how much of the score ends up being the sound design as well?
Yeah, I mean, I do start from the textures and sound. Rather than doing the traditional composing, I do work with sound and more of that. So it is kind of, you could say, it's like creative sound design sometimes. So it goes on over that side. But yeah, so it's quite often sound designers do come at the end. So you don't really, as a composer, get to work with sound designers. I wish that was something that could happen more, where you would get to work with them, because that would make sense and it would be great. But in this point, it was more like the sound designers really just sort of had the score and then they worked on it afterwards. What I'm basically trying to say is I kind of have the whole frequency range to myself, and I just kind of take it all and clean slate and all this stuff. And then sometimes that does mean that when the sound design comes in, it does need to be changed, or it all kind of comes together in the final mix. Almost, doesn't it?
Something that I experienced was that, because I think maybe because Suvi's score is so ambient and kind of edging into sound design at times, it kind of made the distinction between score and sound design maybe like a little bit porous, because the sound designers did start doing things which I kind of felt like were starting to kind of edge into score. So there'd be like a pulse would suddenly appear, or there'd be like some drones I'd be like, well, I'm pretty sure that's not in the soundtrack. And you know, and they were fine because obviously everyone's just going to go like, what about this? And you know, obviously that's part of the process. But yeah, there were a couple of times where I kind of caught something, or my ear caught something, and I was like, I preferred it before when it was, you know, when I prefer it when it was just Suvi.
And is that ever a hard conversation, or like Suvi had mentioned earlier, that's just part of being a collaborator?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I just said about, you know, the sound designers, they were fine with it. It was just, you know, how you approach those conversations. I mean, I think they were just, you know, they're just trying stuff out, and as everybody does, and some of it is great, and some of it you ask for them to change it.
Yeah, if you've got like a vision, then you're the person who the buck stops with you, or however, so you make the decision. But yeah, quite often as a composer, you just kind of do your thing, and I'm sure there's been a project where there's been sound designer and you get to work with them a bit. And yeah, it does make a difference, because then you can divide the frequency range a bit and decide what score is doing and what sound design is doing. So in the end, it all comes together magically in the final mix. Yeah.
And I mean, that is like just such a thing about film, when from the outside perspective, it does seem like some sort of a great magic trick or miracle that 85, 90, 180 minutes come together and becomes this illusion that we all like immerse ourselves into. But one other thing as well is, it looks like this is the feature debut for both of you. Did that present any additional challenges or growing pains for you? And we'll call it lessons, or did you learn or pull out?
Oh man, I mean, there is a whole other podcast to be.
Yeah, I see. I open up another.
Yeah,
big question.
I would have to say it's not for here. The tale of the making of this film was really something. Before this, we were like toying with the words that we were maybe journey. It was a journey. I think we can we could say that.
There were additional things. It wasn't just about being the feature, but it was because it was shot in COVID time. You know, I heard wild stories of you directing from the car in a tent, because you needed to quarantine while they were shooting, and there were all these external things kind of
I mean, that's
everything.
So yeah, lessons. I mean, yes, many lessons. Just it's all about the people. It's all about the collaborators, for better and worse, I would say. But to be honest, that's I've made a bunch of short films before this, and it's exactly the same on that. So I mean, in lots of ways, making a feature isn't like qualitatively different from making a short. There's just more of it. You know, there's more people, more time, you know, more everything. But it's all of those kind of processes and relationships and everything are the same. Although obviously this time I was working with a studio who then they were working into Hulu / Disney. Those were kind of new relationships for me. But yeah, moving right along. But Suvi, was this your first feature film?
Yeah.
All right.
First, obviously, I did like student films back in the day that would have been like feature length films. But I think this would have been the first. There's obviously been things that I would have said no to before as well, and I was kind of waiting for something to come along that was like, when I hear about it, it like sparks something in me. And did I even read the script? I think it was just us having it. You know, you just told me about it.
Yeah.
And you know, something. If you can describe your film in a chat and just talk about it and make it sound interesting, to me that was like, I didn't even question it. I think I was just like, this is it. I really want to do music for this. It really was a dream too. Like, like I said, it was a very organic process. So you don't really think about this being your first film or anything like that. You just kind of start doing it.
The only reason I ask is because had you started work on Baghead? Because I have this sort of feeling that there was a bit of sort of overlap, or did Baghead come in straight after?
Yeah, like I said, this was in COVID times.
Yeah.
I feel like all the projects I was involved in kind of, as in usual in film, the production schedule moves around. But in COVID times, it was kind of, it moves a lot. So things definitely started overlapping a bit and extending. Wasn't there did we have a hiatus?
No, there was definitely, there's definitely a hiatus in the production, because eventually Jemima Rupert, the lead actress, got COVID. So the COVID was still we were kind of coming out of it. The world was, but it was still kind of lurking around, and there was a hiatus for that. But I don't think there was a hiatus when we were working together.
Yeah, it was interesting times in terms of that.
Yeah. Oh, and I do love hearing about how this collaboration came together, because oftentimes it's not something I ever ask about, because a lot of the times the answer is, oh, my agent called me and said, hey, are you interested? And I go, yeah, sure. So this seems like a much, not to say that those people aren't interested in the projects that they're working on, but like this came up much more organically. And on the topic of hiatus, and if this is like something you don't want to answer because of studio things, that's fine. But obviously the film was a 2022 release. The score just came out like last month, I think, maybe January. So it was like a 15-month or so delay. What was the reasoning behind that? Because it's something that you don't see very often.
It was another journey, I think. It was kind of trying to find its home a bit, like where it can exist, and it ended up existing on Disney's platform.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a moment where it might have been existing elsewhere. But yeah, that's probably the best I can say about that. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. I know it can be, especially when you have like larger studios involved up on the hierarchy and the food chain, there can be so many legal clearances and things like that. I know a lot of folks that have a score for a film, and for whatever reason it just isn't getting released, or they have, it's not up to patch.
That was
always seems like a huge bummer, because there's so much great music that's like solely locked into these films. It can never be experienced.
Yeah, that was definitely a surprise as like a first time. Whenever you'd have a score, you just think like, oh, it'll just magically come out somewhere where it belongs.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, there's all this stuff that has to go on in the background that needs to be agreed on, and yeah, it's a whole thing. Yeah, definitely.
And so one last thing as we're wrapping up, the two of you are sitting in a room together talking to me in Bristol. You were just talking about at the beginning of this, both of you knowing Geoff and Ben, and obviously Baghead just came out on Geoff's record label Invada. So it does seem like there's this big film music community in Bristol.
Oh yeah.
How important is that to have an in-person, like real life community for
I think
the
it's
arts?
really important. Yeah, like I wouldn't probably be doing what I'm doing unless I ended up like I studied in Bristol, and then I haven't really studied film music as such, but I've studied sound engineering and music production, and there just happened to be a film school in the same building, so that's how I sort of started doing stuff. And if it wasn't like a very creative city, I don't know if that would happen.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone in Bristol is kind of creative in some way. Like you meet people, and
I mean, it's got that. It's for a long time kind of had that. Bristol's had that reputation as being, like a very kind of creative city, and there does seem to be like a sort of, and again maybe it's just the kind of the circles we move in and the kind of people that we are, but like a sort of disproportionate amount of people who are, like Suvi says, just making stuff of one kind or another. But I mean, I had a really lovely experience recently of making another short film. Obviously, I hope that I'll make another feature and hopefully another one after that and so on. But it takes ages to get a feature made, so I'm always going to be looking for opportunities to make shorts and videos and stuff. Just in the run up to Matriarch, I started making a short film just to kind of warm myself up and just kind of because I hadn't made anything for a couple of years, just to kind of remember what it was like being on set and everything. And just managed to kind of just like pull together like just a really just like up for it crew of people doing various things that were very kind of physically uncomfortable, and give me just like loads of time and talent and just enthusiasm just for the love of like making stuff. So I'm just kind of getting towards the end of the edit now, and so so that's just really nice just to kind of have that kind of studio experience and then go back into kind of really very like the most indie of indie filmmaking, practically like student filmmaking. It's great, and just like with that kind of like Bristol community.
No, I love it. That's great. Well, on that note, I like when we can end on something a bit more positive. So,
absolutely,
good place. Great. Ben, Suvi, thank you again for sitting down and chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, it's been really fun.
A great chat.